All right. Well, Alicia, thank you so much. I was overjoyed when you reached out to me to talk to everybody there in Maine. I miss Maine dearly. It's been, I think, 7 years since I worked at Outward Bound in Maine, which is far too long, and I haven't been back since. Uh, I will loudly state it as a West Coaster, Maine is better sailing than Washington. If you've ever heard people say that we are the best sailing grounds out here, no, you heard it from me. It's not true. I've sailed both places. You've got it better out there. So I hope to find myself back out that way sometime. Yeah, like Alicia said, she and I worked together in Maine and Florida. She was actually my course director in Florida in a very special course I taught down there. But I remember I think she used that course mostly as an excuse to drive a power boat out to Cape Sable and go fishing for a couple of days, um, which I think is a great excuse. um, yeah, so I'm really thinking that the boat shop over there has got a good one in an executive director. It's really awesome to see people doing wonderful things in the world of boats. So myself, my quick background, I did the tall ship thing for a long, long time. I was on both coasts, sailing all over the place. At some point, I transitioned over to working at maritime museums. I worked at the Chesapeake Maritime Museum in Maryland. I worked at South Street Seaport Museum in New York City. But I'm from Washington State. I'm from here in Port Townsend, which we're the West Coast wooden boat place. I imagine that a handful of you have probably been here. You want to raise your screen hands uh, if you've been to Port Townsend? Have you been to the Wooden Boat Festival in Port Townsend? Yeah? There's some of you not showing yourselves on the screen, which I respect, but I saw a few hands. I imagine there's a few more that I didn't see. Yeah, so that's where I live. That's where I'm from. And after the pandemic, I found myself right back here in Port Townsend. And naturally, I'm going to come work at the Maritime Center here down on Water Street, where we're doing all sorts of great programs. And I think that's a great spot for me to probably start sharing a presentation I have. Here we go. All right, yeah, Northwest Maritime. So I don't know if you know this, Alicia, but we rebranded. We're no longer the Northwest Maritime Center. We are just Northwest Maritime. It's a lot of fun. Oh, I also want to encourage you all, if you have any questions, I do presentations in person a lot better because people get to make fun of me and throw comments around and heckle me and stuff, and I do really well with that. So if you want to heckle me in the chat, please do, or ask questions at any point. I'm really happy to answer any of that as we go along. Yeah, so Northwest Maritime, we got to go back if we want to know what Northwest Maritime is about. Back in 1977 or so, I think probably some of you were around. I was not. Excuse me for being a young guy. What can I do about that? 1977, here on the West Coast, from the tales told around all the campfires around here, it was a debaucherous time of a bunch of boat hippies that descended upon the Puget Sound in their ramshackle crafts, and especially here into Port Townsend. Whatever drew them here, we don't know, but they all showed up right here at our marina at the end of town, the Point Hudson Marina, and they got together probably over several beverages, deciding that they needed to put together a wooden boat festival to celebrate their craft. And that's just what they did. So in 1977, they brought together the first Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival. And it was a great howling success. And to keep that going, the Wooden Boat Foundation got put together. And there it is. They started putting together on the water programming. They started doing all the things you might expect a nonprofit to do that is doing programming on the water with youth, building boats, doing programming on boats. This is actually the first boat right here that I instructed an outward bound course on. This is the lapstrake vessel Townsend. I'm guessing Alicia's probably done quite a bit of business on this boat as well. This is one of our long boats here in Port Townsend. So that Wooden Boat Foundation just kept growing, kept providing more sort of programming, and kept putting on that Wooden Boat Festival every single September. And somewhere along the way, someone had this really great idea to take a rundown piece of land in Port Townsend, way at the end of Water Street, which I'm told was an old oil depot, probably some kind of site that needed government funding to clean up. And they needed to put an educational center there. And so that right there is the initial drawing of the Northwest Maritime Center, which did in fact get built in about 2009. I wasn't here, but there it is. And that's where I am today. It's a beautiful spot. I invite you to come down. It's awesome. We do all sorts of programs, a lot of work with youth here. And we continue to put on the Wooden Boat Festival, which this year celebrated 47 years of doing this festival. Every year we have, over the course of 3 days, about 10,000 people, double the population of Port Townsend. About 300 boats, most of them in the water, show up. We have big schooners, small boats, boats that come from great distances away. And all of the accoutrement to the finest wooden boat festivals that you can find around. It is the largest wooden boat festival in North America and the second largest in the world, if our numbers are still correct. But we also have a professional pilot house simulator where we teach youth ship handling, but we also teach mariner credentialing programs. We try to put our hands on everything maritime. This is our Maritime Academy, high schoolers that have class on campus 5 days a week, putting out some fires. And we acquired this old ferry, so we run programs on here so we can teach vessel operations as well as on the water science. And we played a big hand in starting up near Seattle a maritime high school. It's a public high school. You might be aware of the Harbor School in New York City that gets public high school that brings youth through the pipeline of maritime education so that they can come out the other end and find really well-paying jobs that are needed in the maritime sector, which, because all over the world, all over the country, the maritime sector is kind of hurting for that jobs pipeline. So we're doing what we can over here to help move that along, keep people on the water, keep people engaged on the water. And we boil it down. This is how I like to boil it down. Everything we do is all about having transformative maritime experiences. And so, I've been talking about the Maritime Center doing all this youth programming. I'm the guy who puts on these crazy adventure races. Raise your hand for me if you have heard of Race to Alaska. I see a couple hands here. Okay, a couple more hands there. Good, I'm doing my job. That you've at least heard of it. How does Race to Alaska have anything to do with all that? Well, this is the key. This is where it all fits together. Transformative maritime experiences. And this is kind of my portfolio. I manage a race called the 7048, of course, Race to Alaska and Washington 360. And I'm going to talk about each one of those right now. And I'm going to start by talking about Race to Alaska, which was the first race that we came up with way back in 2015. And to kick it off, I think the best thing I can do is show you one of our promotional videos.
The Race to Alaska, a 750-mile race along a coastline that God has forgotten. Each year, a group of lost souls assembles in Port Townsend, Washington, an old frontier town filled with bears. From there, they will use what wits they have to sail their ramshackle vessels up a vile stretch of water called the Inside Passage to Ketchikan, Alaska, an old frontier town filled with bears. The ocean here is savage and offers a glimpse into the indifferent violence of the universe. 15-knot currents, a notoriously unpredictable sea state. Each wave here is its own god, and they are angry. There are no motors allowed in this race, nor is there any support team. Why is this a rule? The racers themselves often shout this question into the night, but the night does not answer. The prize for first place is $10,000. The prize for second place is a set of steak knives. There are no other prizes. Everyone else is simply racing to feed the starving madness within them. But what propels them? Is it some kind of ancient insanity? These pitiful souls throw their bodies and minds into the chasm of destruction in the hopes for a few dollars, or perhaps a set of steak knives. But still, one must have an appreciation for the race. There is a type of beauty to it, yes, but it is a pornographic and violent beauty. I think that God, if he exists, would be a cruel God, and the race to Alaska would be his finest creation. I find myself wondering late at night when sleep escapes me and the hollow void of my mind is laid bare. Would I partake in this insanity? I am so safe in my life. Why would I risk that? Why would I go? Would I go?
So we uh we like to put out fun videos. Uh Race to Alaska was started by my boss, a guy named Jake, at one of our wooden boat festivals. The idea came together that sorry, this is gonna try to play again. The idea came together that we needed to put together a race that was truly a Pacific Northwest adventure race that really had at its core true, honest, pure competition and adventure that didn't have all of the complications of different classes of handicaps, of all of these things that make racing more complicated. And so this race was put together. We're going to take $10,000 cash and we're going to nail it to a tree in Alaska. We're going to say go, and whoever gets there first wins. We don't care what kind of boat you do it in, as long as it does not have an engine in it, meaning you can have a 50-foot yacht, but you have to remove the engine from the engine bay. Or you can go in a kayak for all we care. But those are the only rules, except that you can't be supported in any way. You can stop along the way. You can find apple pies along the way. But if you've pre-planned any support, you're out of here. So it's 750 miles on the inside passage from Port Townsend to Alaska, to Ketchikan, Alaska. And the first day, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I'm kind of hovering right now. This first passage, if you've sailed out here, you know this is the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And boy, can it howl in there. We call it the proving ground. We start the race at 5 a.m. on race morning. We started at 5 a.m. because we think it's really funny that people have to get up that early and go sailing. And that's what they do. We fire the gun and they go, and they have to immediately cross a 30 to 40 mile crossing, which is usually a huge ebb against a huge piece of wind, and it stacks up real good out there. It's a strainer. It is a true proving ground. There are quite a few people that don't make it across that proving ground, and we're glad about it because we don't want to have to worry about them the rest of the 750 miles all the way to Ketchikan. Having fun yet? It's a great race. Rules are, of course, as I said, no engines allowed aboard and no support. There's a couple checkpoints. The first one is a place called Seymour Narrows. And if you want to go to a place that has a lot of power, if you get a lot of glee like I do about being in places in nature that demonstrate a lot of power, this is a place for you. This is a place that, 4 times a day, you've got that tidal switch, and these currents in here get to 15, 16 knots, creating whirlpools that I've seen with my own eyes that are 60 feet across, that have a drop in the center of 7 or 8 feet down. And they're going through this, no engines, no backups, and they're rowing trimarans through there. They're kayaking through there. Incredible spot to be. I highly recommend you go through there. It's a blast. Alicia, you can bring a fishing boat with an engine because it's a lot of fun to play in there on a boat with an engine, which is what I get to do because I'm following along with a media team. So I get to drive a big old power boat through there, which is a super blast. It's like a playground. The second place they have to go through is a place called Bella Bella, which is a small First Nations community along the coast of British Columbia. But besides that, they can take any route they want. They can jump all the way across this stretch of water out to Haida. They can go through a series of inland channels, but it's all dictated by the weather. And the weather out there is some real deal stuff. We've consistently seen people battling it out in 40 to 50 knot winds out there, or they just get pinned down, you know, along the coast. We'll have days along the race route where there's no movement whatsoever because of a giant system coming in from the Pacific. We have one other rule, and it's called Rule 8. If we need to consult a lawyer to determine if you are disqualified, you are automatically disqualified. Take that in. What does that mean to you? Basically, if you take that Racing Rules of Sailing book, that big thick book that maybe you've leafed through because you're involved in races, this rule right here negates the need for that whole book. What it means is come with honor to these races, race the race that you want to race, and get to the end of the race with your honor intact, and you'll be just fine. First place really is $10,000 cash. And if you have never put a nail through $10,000 cash, it's an exhilarating experience knowing that it is, in fact, a federal crime, as far as I know. I've done it personally. It's a powerful feeling. So if you ever get the chance, go for it. And then the funny part is we do nail it in there hard enough that the teams usually have a really hard time getting it back out to spend the money. It's a pretty funny thing to me. The steak knives. These are more important than the $10,000. We have dosed out now 8 sets of these steak knives. They come they're for the second place arrival in Ketchikan. They're engraved. They come in this lovely box, and they truly are a like mid-grade decent steak knife. We're not splurging on the really high-end stuff here, but they are super coveted. There's only 8 teams out there that have them. I have been told that there have been some secret steak knife gatherings of the teams who have won the steak knives in the past. They get together sometimes and they have a lot of steaks together. I am waiting for the day where 2 teams are neck and neck coming into the Tongass Narrows, which is the last place before the finish line in Ketchikan. I'm waiting for the day that one of those teams luffs the main just enough to lose first place, just so that they can clinch the steak knives, because I believe that that would be the most epic move in Race to Alaska history. Give up the cash in exchange for the knives. I think no one could beat that move. So if you're thinking of doing Race to Alaska, I encourage you to pull off that move. It would tickle me at least. I am looking, by the way, I'm still looking in that chat. If you got any questions for me, I don't know if you have to like change settings to message me directly for me to see them, but go for it if you got any questions. But along the way, like it's not about winning, right? What is winning anyway? The dirty little secret of Race to Alaska is that fast boats win races. And Race to Alaska was not meant to have just fast boats pitted against each other, just to have epic, like, you know, long hulls that can really, really cruise this course pitted just against each other. We wanted to have a race where you're going to have world-class professional racers on performance trimarans racing against some home-built, you know, ketch with a mast that they stole a tree from their neighbor's yard, which in fact has happened. I didn't just make that up. And what do you get? What do you win? Well, everybody who gets to Ketchikan wins, because you get to travel through some of the most beautiful places in the world, like that right there. You get to experience some really incredible sailing conditions, potentially some really scary sailing conditions. This is one of those whirlpools I was talking about in Seymour Narrows. You get to see this with your own eyes. And I thought I'd talk through just a couple of the teams that we had just this last year in Race to Alaska. Our application season hasn't opened yet, so I don't know who's going to be racing in next year's races, but I can tell you about a few folks who did races last year just to give you a little bit of flavor about who we tend to see in this race. So this team, Wicked Wily Wildcat, guy named Adam Cove. He happens to be the technical editor of Sail Magazine, lives down in Massachusetts, right around the corner from the Marshall facility where they make the Marshall cat boats, and he decided he wanted to sail a cat boat to Alaska, which you're in Maine. Probably most of you have probably sailed a beetle cat at some point or another. It's not like an incredible choice for a race boat, right? That's probably not what most people would pick, but man, he did it in style, this guy. He was very, very comfortable. And he actually put out a really great video after it was done, and we did a little coverage of him too. So if you want to look him up, Wicked Wily Wildcat, he did it solo also, Adam. These two, this was a couple, John and Kayla, and they finished this in a Hobie 16. Yet another thing you might not think at first to go try to sail 750 miles to Alaska in those conditions. They finished the race. They beat a whole lot of people. I can't remember what place they came in, but it was way faster than anyone expected. And it blew everybody's mind because they showed up in Ketchikan with like one duffel bag on deck, and that's all. And they were ready to keep going. Really incredible. They won what we call a side bet, which is the 20 and under award. The fastest team to Ketchikan gets $1,000 and a set of tactical sporks in a custom box. They won it this year, but they also are the fastest boat ever under 20 feet to finish Race to Alaska. This is my good friend Liam. He's a liveaboard on this Contessa, and he decided to take his liveaboard. He won the award of the fastest wood stove to Alaska because he does, in fact, have a wood stove aboard his liveaboard. He didn't even unpack anything. After the race was done, he says he unloaded his boat and he gained 2 inches of water line. He probably could have got to Ketchikan a lot faster than he did. This is a team of youngsters. They actually first competed in 2022 as team rite of passage when they were all under 17 years old. They were our first truly just youth team that finished Race to Alaska, and they crushed it. They made a lot better choices than a lot of the adults out there and proved a lot of the adults wrong who thought they couldn't do it. But this year, two of the siblings who were on that original team in 2022 decided to do their own teams. Team Rock the Boat and Team Roscoe Pickle Train, both aboard Santa Cruz 27s. They each had one sibling aboard, and they battled it out in the same type of craft. But the skipper Roscoe Pickle Train got boomed pretty good, and they had to lay him up for a day, and they lost their lead. It was a bummer. This was another youth team that we had just to show that the youth are starting to take over the scene here in Race to Alaska. We get people who come to our races for a cause. Guardian Sailing is a nonprofit that was started by Michael, the captain of this team, after he got back from a couple of tours in Afghanistan and determined that sailing was the best thing for PTSD. So he started this nonprofit to do sail training for veterans, and he used Race to Alaska to spread the word about his program, which I think he accomplished quite well. We get some weird boats in Race to Alaska. Has anyone ever pedaled a Nauticraft Escapade? Anybody? No? I haven't, but I'd really like to, because the guy who did this, I think he was in his mid-70s, Jim, he didn't finish the race, but he got pretty far in it. He actually finished our Washington 360 race in this boat a couple of years ago, but he encountered some pretty crazy conditions in his Nauticraft. So if you're thinking of buying one, it's actually a pretty solid craft. This guy came on his little plastic catamaran from Israel. People hear about this race. They feel that they need to do it. Like I said, people do this for a cause. Also, people do this to mark events in their lives. Ohad, who was the solo sailor on this boat, he was ending a 20-year career, and he needed something to transition. And so he set his entire being pointed towards Race to Alaska as his means of transitioning into whatever came next in his life. And honestly, in the back of my head, I really didn't think he was going to make it because he had done most of his sailing in the Mediterranean. And I was like, oh, Hod, man, it's cold out there. You got to be prepared for that stuff. He was not going to take a dry suit, but someone did force it on him, thank God. And he got to Ketchikan. And then there's this guy, terrible photo, but you should know about him. His name is Sha Huang, and he lives down in California. And gosh, he just lives on this Hobie tandem island. If you've ever been on a Hobie tandem island, it is yet another vessel that you might not think of doing an epic sailing race up the inside passage on. But and we didn't think so either. But when he sent in his resume to get vetted so that we could accept him into the race, he described that he goes on trips on this boat where he will not touch land for 5 days in a row. He just stays out there on his Hobie Tandem Island. And the last 5 days of Race to Alaska, he didn't touch land either. All the way from that checkpoint in Bella Bella, 5 more days up to Ketchikan, he did not even stand up in his boat. And he almost fell off the dock when he got into Ketchikan, but he didn't. These two are from Maine. They're pretty cool. They weren't in last year's race, but it's a great photo. This is another gentleman who marked a life transition in Race to Alaska. His wife of 35 years passed away. They had spent their marriage cruising the Inside Passage together. And when she left, he decided he needed a project. So he built this boat here at the Maritime Center, and he used the Race to Alaska to transition into the next part of his life. At which point he like Moitessier'd his way out of the race and just vanished off into the ether. We think he's still out there sailing somewhere. And I just love this photo because this is a great example of what people need to do to their vessels in order to complete Race to Alaska, because you can't have an engine aboard. If you want to bring a big cat like this to the party, you have to propel it somehow, because you have to get off the dock and you have to do something about the doldrums that are going to happen along the way. So people put pedal drives and rowing systems, all sorts of things. I don't know about the physics of having one hull on pedals and one on oars, but these guys actually did wind up winning the steak knives that year. So kudos to them. And then there's this. This here is Carl. He is the only person to ever complete Race to Alaska on a stand-up paddleboard. And he beat 9 sailboats while he did it. The story goes that in one of those bags on his deck, it's just full of nutrition tablets, because that's all he ate. Calibrated nutrition tablets every 15 minutes. And that's how he made it through. We've had someone trying for a couple years now to be the second stand-up paddleboarder to do it. No success so far. Hopefully it's coming soon. Ooh, okay, that's going to be Race to Alaska. I could say so much more about Race to Alaska, but we're going to leave it there because we got some more races to talk about. Any thoughts or questions about Race to Alaska before I move on? Any burning questions you have?
Yeah, how many people typically enter?
Yeah.
How many people typically enter? Great question. So this last year, I believe we had, there's a few people that only do the proving ground. I'm going to see, I'll just stop my share for a second. There's a few people who only do the proving ground. And this last year, I think there was maybe 8 who did that. And then there's like, usually it's about in the mid 30s to 40 teams that do the race.
And how long does it take typically? I don't know if typically is a good word, but
right. There's a huge range, right? So we give them about 3 weeks, a little longer than 3 weeks. We have what's called the Grim Sweeper, which is a motor vessel chasing them that leaves Port Townsend on a given day, making 75 miles a day. And once it passes you, you're out. And it arrives in Ketchikan, and at that point, the race is over. The fastest team to ever do it was in 3 days, 22 hours, and some odd minutes, 750 miles. No one's gotten close to that yet. We've had some teams do it just under 5 days. We've had several teams do it somewhere in the 5-day range. But they get up to about 3 weeks to do it, and we do have people coming in after about 3 weeks.
do you keep in communication with them at all during the race?
We have trackers on board, so we issue trackers to them. We make it really clear to everyone that the trackers truly are just for entertainment, mainly, because when we say that people are meant to be relying on themselves for safety, that we're not out there looking after them, we really do mean that. So we're not chasing them down for their own sake. They need to be able to take care of themselves. But there's actually relatively good connectivity along a lot of the race course, believe it or not. And I do carry a race phone, so I do get a lot of texts from the racers, but we try not to bother them too much. we put together a media team so that the race can be something that everyone gets to experience, even if you're not out there racing. So we put out daily edited videos from our professional video team. We put out written pieces. So we do catch up to them in motor vessels kind of as often as we can without bothering them too much. Yeah, but that's about how much contact we have with them while they're racing.
Last thing, I just wanted to compliment you on the promotional video. It's one of the most deranged things I've ever seen.
Yeah, well, I didn't have a hand in that one, but I do love it. It is it's pretty good. The guy who's doing the Werner Herzog voice really nailed it.
When does this race happen?
It happens typically in early June is when we
Okay.
put it. Yeah, and it was put in early June because that's just like a nasty time. It's really unpredictable up there. Anything can happen. We get some really big stinky blows, but we also get some really calm days. So you have to be really ready for anything.
I can understand $10,000 being the first prize, but why did you have steak knives as the second prize? Was it just given to you and you thought you'd just give it away?
No, it was so I wasn't there at the start. I'm the second race boss. I wasn't around at the start of the race in 2015, but the story goes that it was from the movie, or I guess it's a play, Glengarry Glen Ross. There's a joke in there somewhere about winning a set of steak knives. And Jake, my boss, he thought it was funny, and so he decided steak knives was the thing to do.
Right.
Kind of highlights the fact that there's no other prizes. Okay, well, I'm going to continue on, but if you have any more questions about Race to Alaska, I'm happy to answer them later or whenever. Let's see if I can find my presentation again.
Bobby, do you think you and I should do this together?
Yeah, I'd be glad to try.
Okay. Oh, I'm having a share issue. Hold on. Give me 1 second. Somebody tap dance while I figure this out. I've done something silly here. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, and we're back. Great. So 7048, a couple years after the first race to Alaska, it had been running for a couple of years after 2015. And in 2018, it was decided, man, we need something closer to home here in the Puget Sound and something specifically for human-powered craft. And 7048 was born. 70 is the amount of miles, 48 is the amount of time that you have to accomplish it. And you better believe I have a video to show you.
There's no sound, Jesse, just so you know.
Okay, well, that's 7048. I fully understand. It's going to try to play again. I don't know why it always does that. I know that that video is not nearly as funny as the Race to Alaska one. I want you to know that I know that, but it's pretty epic. 7048, like I said, 70 miles, 48 hours. I don't know if you've spent any time in the Puget Sound, but it's a nice and complicated waterway. Tacoma is down here near the southern end of the Puget Sound. And we start this race at 7 p.m. kind of for the same reason that we start Race to Alaska at 5 a.m. It's because we think it's hilarious that it starts at night. We love it. It forces people to paddle through the night. They have to transit what can be pretty congested waterways filled with all sorts of hazards. I like to think of 7048 as a video game. And every great video game out there, at the end of every level, you have the boss that you have to beat. And so I think there is a series of bosses that need to be conquered in 7048 if you are going to succeed. The first one is the race start itself. We typically have about 125 teams in all sorts of human-powered craft. You can bring anything to this party as long as it doesn't have an engine or is propelled by sails. You can use pedal power, paddle power. We've had a guy do it on a prone paddleboard, which is basically just, you know, using your hands. It does not seem like a very efficient way to move on the water. More power to him. It's great. But at the race start, you're cramming those 125 teams into a very narrow waterway, as you can see here. And so you just have to navigate the start without being capsized or losing too much paint off of your hull. That's the first boss of 7048. The second boss is right here on your screen right now. It gets dark almost immediately when the race starts. It's at 7 p.m. By about 9:30, it's dark. And you are, at that point, in a place called Colvos Passage, between the mainland of the Olympic Peninsula and an island called Vashon Island. And boy, I don't know how it is so dark in there, but it is darker than a lot of other places somehow. But it is also a really interesting place to navigate in the Puget Sound, because there is I'll actually go back to this map. It's right down just north of where it says Owen Beach. There's that little channel, and it's this weird spot where the current is always running north. No matter what tide, no matter what day, it always runs north through there. What that means is that any traffic going through the sound is going to go through this narrow passage, including commercial traffic. There are gravel barges and passenger vessels, all sorts of things going through there. And at the same time, 125 amateurish 7048 racers. So that can be a little daunting getting through that in the dark. The third boss, believe it or not, is raccoons. I don't know if there's raccoon problems on any of the nice islands out there on the coast of Maine. I never ran into any in Maine, but man, if you got one raccoon on one of our islands out here, you've got 100 raccoons. And there's the first spot that people might stop and take some rest is an island called Blake, and those raccoons are vicious. It's a warning to you if you do any Puget Sound cruising. Blake Island, raccoons, remember it. Third one, we have the largest commercial ferry system in the country. It is also falling apart. I don't know if you've read the news. We're having troubles out here, but these ferries are still running, and our course crosses 6 ferry runs along the way. And the first big ferry runs are encountered right when people are starting to get really tired for the first time, but right before they've decided to take a break. So they're exhausted, it's dark, they've just battled raccoons, and now they need to run into some ferry crossings where these ferries are going upwards of 25 or more knots on the water. And then there's, of course, conditions. We can get really nasty conditions out here just like you can get out there. We have big currents, big tides. We have big weather systems that blow through. And there's also big ship wakes. You have to deal with that. That's another boss on the 7048 course. And then you run out of gas. My God, people push it pretty hard in this thing because they think that they are going to crush this course in a single go. But the fact is, they need to refuel, and people tend to push it pretty hard when they're in a race. And on top of that, racers may have encountered traffic. They may have encountered the darkness. They may have encountered the raccoons or the conditions. They may have even encountered dehydration and exhaustion, but typically they've not encountered them all at the same time. And that is what people are really dealing with in 7048, because by the time they get to the end of the course, they're dealing with all of those things at once. And the last couple miles of the course is actually usually when the wind turns around and is right on your nose, which is kind of the last challenge of 7048. This is kind of just a random photo of an awesome team. They happen to be a team of my coworkers. I just like to highlight them. This is one of our vessels here at the Maritime Center. This is a team that I love and I wanted to tell you about. Right here, you have, well, first I'll tell you about the team that inspired this team. There is a school in Colorado called the Platte Canyon High School, and they wanted to put together a team to get over a community trauma that they had. So they built this boat that you're looking at right now. They trained in a lake in Colorado, and they put together a high school team and did the race in 2021, I believe. But what you're looking at here is another school. This is the Utah School for the Deaf and Blind. This is a school of deaf and blind students who were inspired by the Colorado school to compete in 7048, and they borrowed the Colorado school's boat to do it. And they have at this point completed the race 3 times, and you'll see in the lower right there, they've actually had built a custom canoe for the purpose. And we see them every year. It really makes my job worthwhile knowing that they're having this experience. It's really awesome to see them. And they're, of course, just one of 125 different stories that happen on 7048. I'm noticing that the clock is getting low here, so I'm going to try to speed talk. I'm going to introduce to you now the race that we're putting on in 2025. We are no longer going to run Race to Alaska every single year. We are going to begin alternating with this race called Washington 360. One last video, if we can squeeze it in.
And hey, Jesse, there's no sound.
Okay, my film guy, he really went nuts with the music on that particular video. I understand. It's quite intense. But all right, it's cool. So Washington 360 came about as a response to COVID. We couldn't run Race to Alaska over the border into Canada, so we flipped the script and we created a similar race inside the bounds of Washington. This is a photo from the one time we ran it in 2021, but we're not thinking of this coming year as the second Washington 360. This is the reboot. This is where Washington 360 comes into its own and is established as a Puget Sound event, bringing the community together. And that's the point. We've narrowed the things down to 2 classes. We had more classes in 2021, but that was too complicated. So just 2 classes, the wind division for anybody sailing and the muscle group for anybody not sailing. You can't get any more simple than that. The winner of Washington 360 gets their hands on the World Championship belt. Their name is engraved on it forever, and they go down in history with honor and prestige and glory. And I'd show you the belt. It's here with me, but you got to come to Washington to see it. The cruising grounds, although I told you that Maine is a better cruising ground, man, Washington is pretty close. We have some beautiful places to sail through, and in 2021 we had 56 teams compete in this task. The first 2.5 days, these guys on a tandem kayak were actually in the lead, because the fact is, in late June, early July, the South Puget Sound can be very, very windless. So it's a real equalizer between those 2 class divisions of sailing and not sailing. I'm going to be interested to see the year that a human powered team wins all the way. Get to sail right by the big cities, right by the rural places, however you choose to do it. seeing all the communities along the way. It's an incredible place to be. That race, I'm very excited. It's opening the application tomorrow along with 7048. Oh, by the way, I was talking about the youth competitors in 2021. We had our youngest ever racer. This is Emmy Lou. She was 4 and completed Washington 360. We hope to see her back this year. To this date, these are the numbers of people who have finished each one of our races. You can see more people have summited Everest or done all those other cool things than have completed all of our races. But amongst all of those numbers, we have only had 3 people complete all 3 of our races. And for that, they receive an award. It's called the 1180. That's the sum of mileage of all of our races put together. Those 3 people include that gentleman who did the stand-up paddleboard to Race to Alaska, Carl Kruger. He was one of the first 2 people to get it. The second is Lillian. She did a cool thing in the first Washington 360. She made a portage that was within the rules, but a real crazy decision to make. Nobody else has done that, going down the Hood Canal. I hope to see someone do that again next year. And the third person to do it is this gentleman, Greg Roner. He was 78 when he finished it. So if you're going to tell me at some point you think you're too old to do our races, I'm going to call BS on you, because you certainly can do our races. And that's the next part. Ways to play. You can race this thing. If you want to come out here, you wouldn't be the first person from Maine to come do our races. Applications open tomorrow for our races. Check out the websites. It'll tell you all about it. But if you're not going to race, if you don't want to race, you can track and follow. We have, just like all the good races, we use the yellow brick tracking system. But we also, like I told you, we put out a lot of other types of content, videos, written pieces. Last year, we also made a whole bunch of songs about Race to Alaska, which was pretty hilarious. So you can follow that way. And if you really are looking for something to do in the summer, you want to spend some extra time out in Washington, you can come volunteer. It's a really great way to get to know a lot of the racers, get involved in what we're doing here. If you happen to be a medical professional or, someone who at least knows their way around a Band-Aid, you can join our medical team. If you want to come play with boats, we do have some support teams on the water, mostly media, but those are the ways to play. This is this next year's dates for the races. June 6th through 8th is for 7048. June 27th through July 12th is the dates for Washington 360. I know I talked fast there at the end because I didn't want to get to 8 o'clock with no minutes left for any questions. So that's the end of the presentation. I didn't pause for questions for 7048, but if you have any questions about 7048 or Washington 360, I would more than love to answer them for you.
Jesse, what's the prize for Washington 360?
It is the belt. So we haven't
that's right.
dangled a big wad of cash in front of people for this one, but I am working on some sponsors to provide some additional awards at the end of this race.
And what kind of boat did it in 3 days, the race to Alaska?
Oh, it was a Marstrom. I wasn't around. It was a Marstrom catamaran. I forget the length, but it is lightning fast, and it has been for sale since it won Race to Alaska, which is funny to me. Someone hasn't bought it to, win Race to Alaska again.
I have a question about Washington 360. I looked at the results of the first race you had, and it looked like no multi-hulls finished.
Oh, that's not true. No, they did. Now I need to look and see where we've gone wrong online. Where did you see that? On our own website?
Yeah, somehow I got the website that had results, and it looked like all the finishers were multi-hulls. I mean, monohulls.
We could just have something wrong with our spreadsheet. No, I see multi-hulls there. I don't know. If you find it, you want to point me that way, I'll correct that, because the first 2 teams in were mono hulls, and then it started sprinkling in some multis.
Okay, thanks.
We usually have a whole lot of Corsairs do our races. It's kind of the bread and butter for the multi-hull crews out there.
Jesse, I know there's been a lot of amazing humans that have, I'm going to just speak to Race to Alaska, but of course I want to hear just a tiny bit about, was it Sail Like a Girl or?
Yeah.
We just
Yeah.
share.
So Alicia's talking about this incredible team headed up by a woman named Jean Gusev, who put together a team called Sail Like a Girl. Their aim is to inspire women to get on the water because you know what? Uh, it's been a male dominated pursuit for a really long time, and they wanted to show people that women could compete, and they did just that. And Sail Like a Girl won on a monohull, and then they followed it up by Gene putting together another team and winning again in 2022. They raised a lot of money for women on the water programs. And in addition to that, they inspired a team that competed just now in 2024 called Sail Like a Mother, which they did actually ask the blessing of Gene to be able to name their team that. It was three mothers who wanted to go out and sail as a team. And so there has been, it's been a really great breeding ground for women to be on the water competing as women on the water. And so there are so many stories about Race to Alaska. That's one of the classics right there. I could tell you about the team of paraplegic and quadriplegic guys sailing a trimaran who only got part of the way through the course before one of the guys decided he didn't want to sail anymore. The team had to be disqualified, but a couple of other racers who had just landed in Ketchikan flew down to help them finish the race, even though they were disqualified. There's people who have washed up on beaches, broken their rudders off, found help on the shore to build a new rudder, pushed themselves back off, and completed the race. These things happen every single year, all sorts of crazy, wonderful stories that inspire everybody.
Jesse, not to focus on Race to Alaska, but I guess that's what I'm most familiar with. But if you had one piece of advice for folks that wanted to participate in this race, what would you give them? What would you say?
Train with your pedal drive. I'm talking to the sailors out there. We get these applications in, and people think of the human powered component of their sailboat as kind of an afterthought because they tell me, oh, you know, this boat sails really well in light winds. We'll just sail. That's just not true. Any team that has ever completed Race to Alaska has spent hours and hours and days propelling their sailing vessel through the water. And some people show up without extra chains for their pedal drive. Some people haven't tested them. Some people haven't touched them by the day they show up, and that's always bad news for them.
Jesse, I'm intrigued with the Utah School for Deaf and Blind. Are they deaf and blind, or they're one or the other?
It's one or the other or both. Yeah,
Wow.
to varying levels.
Were they able to negotiate sailing and communicating with one another pretty well?
So there are teachers facilitating their experience on board, but they train. One of the interesting things that they've done for the visually impaired students is they've created tactile nautical charts so that the students, in addition to just to paddling, they can follow along with where they are. So they've been using it as a platform to try to figure out ways to keep students engaged, even if they don't have all of the sensory facilities as everybody else.
Wow.
And do the numbers continue to grow each year?
Yeah, well, 70-48 has really been amazingly like solid. We've actually capped it. We like to have it around 125, but it's just naturally stayed around that number for a few years now. I've been hearing enough buzz in this lead up to our applications opening that I'm kind of expecting we might see a little jump this year. Race to Alaska has flagged just a little tiny bit. That's part of the reasoning behind doing Washington 360, in addition to it being a great program on its own, is that we want Race to Alaska to be that big energetic push, but also we want to give people a pipeline who aren't quite ready for Race to Alaska, something they can do on the way to being ready to do Race to Alaska. So we'll see how many do Washington 360 this year. I have no idea how many are going to come out of the woodwork for this thing.
I noticed on your Race to Alaska video that it was, were you sponsored to some degree by Uncruise?
In that year we were. Yeah, we take sponsorships. You know, just like everybody, we're nonprofits, so we try to fund things as we can. Race to Alaska is not as shiny and wonderful as it is. It's not a huge money maker. It's really here because it's a wonderful thing. It gets people engaged on the water. So we do try to offset some of the costs through sponsorships and stuff.
I just wanted to say, for those who want a much, 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 much less adventurous trip, I did an Uncruise
Oh, you
cruise
did?
time, and they were terrific.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was they do things all over the world, but we did the Juneau to Juneau Inside Passage, so
yeah,
tremendous experience.
yeah. I've never done it. I hear good things.
Any more questions out there for Jesse this evening?
Just simply to say, Jesse, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating.
Thanks, Robert. It's been fun.
Dad, you're on, you're muted. I can see you talking.
There we go.
There we
Yeah.
go.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say all of my questions got answered the first go around there. So thank you for that. And it was very, very interesting. Enjoyed it very much.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Jesse, it's so great to reconnect. I love what you're doing out there. Thank you for all your great work. And when you come to Maine, be sure to look Annie and I up, and we'll do
I
this on
will.
the other side. Thanks for this evening, and we'll see you soon, I hope.
All right. Good night.
Night.
Good night, everybody.
Night.